I'm Yves. I'm the director of FIDE. Very quickly, FIDE is a non-profit that was created a few years ago because we felt there is a new movement in deliberative democracy, democratic innovation happening in Europe. And a lot of people, policymakers, civil servants, NGOs, were looking for information, expertise. And so that's basically what FIDE tries to do. And part of this is, of course, organizing these events, capacity building. I'll talk a bit more about this at the end of my presentation. I will give you a bit of, until 10 o'clock, why you're in this room. So probably a lot of the things I will say will resonate with you, but I'll also talk a bit about the what. I'll give a bit of general introduction into citizen assemblies, deliberative, what are the components, and then from then on you won't hear from me anymore. The rest of the 2 days you will hear from our speakers. If you haven't been told, the program and everything is on the back, but I'll go through a few elements of it as I speak. So, why did, well, some of you traveled by metro, some of you came by plane, but also why is there a need for democratic innovation? Again, I do this talk also to sometimes skeptical people. Yes, so this is Marcel Duchamp, for those of you who know art. It's the guy who reinvented modern art by signing his name on a urinal. And he has this quip where he says, there is no solution because there's actually no problem. People are very often looking for solutions whilst they could just sit. You know, humans are a lot looking for solutions for problems that don't exist. So a guy called Simon Sinek wrote a bestseller recently, Look for the Why or something. Well, he had this in one quip already a long time ago. Like, you first need to think, why am I doing this? And so you can have several reasons, yes? In some cases, your democracy is in this state, and then you don't need a lot of convincing. Some will even say that the car has already landed and is shattered. Some democracies are really on the brink of going down, and especially for somebody of my generation who started political science in the 1990s, we had this kind of feeling of things going up and now going down again. So in some places, the car is really going off the cliff. As Hanu already said, in some countries there is, yes, complacency, but there is more the feeling like there's trouble in the family, but it's, of course, nothing compared to some countries where there is real democratic decline, institutions are breaking down or actively being broken down. And some of the critics, sometimes when we present this, and we already in Belgium have a journalist who wrote a book actively saying that citizen assemblies are not needed, politics has always been like a dysfunctional family. And they'll point at books like The Crisis of Democracy from 1972, big report by, amongst others, Samuel Huntington, for those of you who know, Harvard scholar, died a few years ago, who wrote a report in the 1970s for the American government saying, democracy is really in crisis. Actually, this predicted it would collapse in a few years. So these skeptics will tell us the collapse of democracy is old news. I'll try to take a different take on that. Even if you say democracy has always been like this, it's like, the car has always been missing a wheel and it's always been driving. In everything humans do, we look for innovation. In anything we do, in any field of endeavor, humans are looking to change, make better, innovate. So even if in Finland, democracy in parliament won't collapse tomorrow, or even in Belgium, where we have a sort of functioning dysfunctionality, you could say, like, well, if we look at problems in democracy, even in good functioning democracy, can we innovate and maybe solve those problems rather than just say, like, you know, it's problematic. It's always been problematic. And so what is the problem we're trying to solve? You know, the attributed to Lincoln, you know, democracy being of the people, by the people, and for the people. If you look at it from an that perspective, oh, this is, wow, sorry, lost you there. Our problem is by the people. That's always been like the promise and the deception in democracy, yes? It is done by the people. And so the solution that we've relied on for a long time, and that does do part of the trick, is elections and representative democracy. Actually also there, for a number of decades, even empirical research, and some of the scholars might, there's a few scholars in this book. This is a book by 2 scholars from the US who basically reviewed 40 years of electoral research and break down a lot of the kind of high idealistic. They show that in many countries, if you ask voters a bit deeper about even how things work, who decides what, which party is actually doing what, most people are very quickly clueless. You know, that elections very often run on less high-level things than theory would predict. The sad thing about this book, and for those of you who were in Copenhagen, Nicole Curato during a speech mentioned it, is that these people end then by basically saying voters can't do this and we should, you know, so they end with a less faith in citizens, which I think is a bit sad. But their analysis is pretty much, there is a basic flaw even built in this. It does a few good things, but it doesn't live up to the high promise. So you could say, well, we have loads of participation next to that, and it does a lot of good things. Yes, there is participation everywhere. In the Scandinavian countries, you have, I think, a rich history, yes, of citizen participation. Also in my country, both guided by civil society, but also cities organize loads of things, town hall meetings. But also there, we have a few buts. Yes, if this would work, we wouldn't be here. Yes, we would all be at home drinking a coffee and watching, well, today's sun, but yesterday a bit more atmospheric noir weather. What is one of the problems is research on participation has shown that a lot of participation efforts are very much skewed towards mainly the big skew is people higher educated versus lower educated. In some cases, higher educated, if there is data, might make up 80–90% of the people who show up or participate. These are not evil people. They want to do good things with their participation, but it means they have certain preferences. Yes? And this will mean other preferences will not be voiced in that other canal that you opened to, you know, do something next to your representative and electoral. And so this book by 2 Dutch scholars, Boves and Willet, the title kind of says it, but there's been research. The first book on citizen participation, Elman and Verba, 1963, had one conclusion. Socioeconomic status is the best predictor of whether people would participate or not. This is 1963. We're 2023. This book just repeats that same conclusion. Yes, I was part of an online participation on the Belgian constitution organized by my government, very open platform, but we had data. In the end, 80% of the participants had a university degree, yes, not just higher education, university degree, and I think 78% were men. If you then say like, this is what the Belgian population says, you're actually very much skewing what you actually say the people want. Second problem you can encounter, and there's not a lot of politicians in the room, but if you say like, we'll have a hearing, who comes to the hearing? People who are not happy, people who want to throw bricks at you. This is from a hearing on a mobility plan in Brussels. This is a district with 130,000 people. This is the hearing. I've been using this photo since I saw it. This is actually a clip from a video, but I made a still and a screen capture because this is just the one regular guy this is the whole people who don't want to lose their parking spot, yes? And they're super angry. Actually, they had to stop this council meeting happening because these people were just shouting so hard. The mayor had to go like, okay, stop. We stopped the meeting. But this is, let's say, the one naive guy who went to the hearing, like, and you can see him sitting in his corner. He doesn't even speak, but he's like, because the rest of the group is just shouting, no, no, no to the plan. And that's it. The city actually paused the plan because there is too much disruption. Talk to anybody in Brussels and mention the plan is called Good Move, and you will have a fun evening for and against. But actually, I live in that district. I'm not sure whether this group, which is about 200, that fills a city hall. Imagine 200 people here, all with a sign saying no, and you're a politician, and they're all shouting. You know, what is your guess whether people like your plan or not? So they paused it. They're not scrapping it, but so it's a policy decision made by those who show up and are very loud and visible. This is a community group in the Netherlands that blocked a windmill. Yeah, you might have something against windmills. They're like 2, 4, 6, 8, you know, that's your community. Yes, this is a photo also from the news. And the photo, media also does this, citizens in village blah blah don't want windmills. And then you have this picture. I'm a bit like, even as a journalist, it's like, that's like a small group of people. They actually have a hat with no. No does seem to do it very well. Even half of them don't want to wear the hat. But media does this. Again, as a politician, you might feel public policy being swayed by a small minority. So, what we actually have, what is a bit of the problem, is loads of surveys. The EU had one recently, and should ordinary people be more involved in the EU? 80% of people go like, yes, ordinary people should be more involved in politics. You find this across the bank, everywhere. But if you ask people in the same survey or another one, do you think ordinary citizens are involved in politics or have some sway on politics? People say no. This is data from the US. Thank you, Margin. I stole it from one of your slides, just attributed credit here. But it just shows this very well, right? In 1964, more than 60% of Americans still believed that stuff happening in Washington was for the benefit of regular Joe and Jane. Yes? By now, 91% of Americans believes it is a few big interests. By the way, before you, it is, yes, big interests are big companies, and if you ask people, but there's also research showing that a minority, but a sizable minority, also of Europeans, distrusts elites like NGOs as much. Yes. Why? Because we look the same. Look, I'm an academic, but maybe not good enough to be working for Shell or whatever, but we're kind of interchangeable. Yes. We go to the same universities, we look the same. If I want to talk to a politician, probably I have a friend working in cabinet that went to political science with me, and we did a PhD together. One went to business, one goes to politics, one works for the NGO FIDE. I'm exaggerating this a bit, but for some people, the idea is like, there are people who have access in Brussels, Washington, think the Gilets jaunes in France, and who really distrust the idea. So people want more citizens to participate, have the feeling that less and less ordinary people have been involved. Whether this is reality or not, you know, you can have a long discussion, but if 91% of your population thinks people like me are not involved, that will sway how they think about democracy, whether it's worthwhile or not. That will sway elections, and that will define that they're willing to vote for somebody because we're not involved anyway, so we don't really care if this house slowly collapses because it's not our house anyway. Yes? So, I'm taking a bit of a leap here, but, you know, then we should have all people involved. Yes? One of the problems, of course, is, yes, we should keep all the participation we have. Go to city hall meetings if you know, be part of a group promoting cycling and go to meetings every evening, especially if you don't have children yet and if you don't have. But for example, we know from research, one of the groups even highly educated that miss out on many processes are people with young children, anywhere between 0 and 15. Your evenings are spent making food, driving them to sports, and etc. Yes? Research shows that, you know, degree is one, time is another one. Yes? So have everyone participate all the time. That puzzle has been around since 1963, since that first report. What is one of the trouble is people want people like them to be involved, but they cannot be that person all the time themselves. Think about it. You need to think about the climate, you need to think about this, you need to think about that, you need to be active about that. There's stuff happening in Africa you should be concerned about. At some point, it's almost mind-numbing. You pick one if you have the time and you want to do the engagement, but you can't be following everything all the time. Yes? So the idea of having online apps, for example, very often think like, if we only have an app, all citizens can vote on everything. The thing is, that also means I have to follow everything to have an opinion. I have to read everything. And my city will, if I talk to people, mayors, they'll be like, but people don't know what the city's doing for them. Then I'll talk to the provincial representative. People don't know what the province is doing. They should know what the province do and follow, and we're trying to engage them. And then in Belgium we have what we call lasagna. We have regions, so we have 7 parliaments, and all of them will be like, people should read and follow what we do. I lectured political science. I'm just going to make it on tape, but I've said this enough in public. I don't know all the stuff that happens all the time either, right? I can't be involved all the time in everything. I pick a few battles, but so. And this is actually a book that, for me, when I was a political scientist, in the beginning I was also like, we just need more participation from everybody in everything. This book, again, wouldn't agree with everything in it, was the first it's called Stealth Democracy, that actually said people want a system they trust, but they don't want to be engaged the whole time. But they want a democracy that they know, stealth, like sometimes it's invisible to them, but they know it's out there. I can trust it, and it's a system that I can trust. And part of that is, it's a system where people like me, or the ideas of people like me, are actually, they matter, right? A book from this year, by the way, that kind of captured this, but focuses again on the impossible how to hack your way to be all the time, is called Democracy for Busy People. The conclusion is focused on elections, but just saying, this is a question even very serious political scientists are like, how can we solve, you know, the problem of people needing to spend almost 3 or 4 hours of their day if you want to do the democratic ideal with everybody involved. So, and I have a little bit of time left to now come into the matter of why we are here today. This is not a new problem. And the first time this problem led to a sort of new way of doing things was 2 scholars before internet working on 2 sides of the globe, coming up with the exact same problem and the same type of solution. They actually only discovered about each other, I think, 20 years later, meeting at a conference, like, I do this thing. It's like, oh, me too. I've been doing it since 1971. Well, me too. They actually started, I think, I see you nodding, a month apart from each other. This is Herr Dienel, who in Wuppertal, Germany, worked with citizens around city planning. And what was his conclusion? Beginning of the 1970s, I always have the same 6 people in the room. By the time I do several plans in the same city, I know who these people are, what their kids are named, and you know what sports they're doing. How can I get other people in the room? And this is Ed Crosby, who was working in the US, and who came to the same conclusion. He was a PhD student, working also on city planning and these types of citizen engagement processes. And both came up with the idea, if we could have how do you take a random sample of the population? It is drawing by lot. And so they both reused an old idea, but this is where I take a bit this innovation tag. They saw it as not, I want to do what Greece did. They were like, I have a contemporary problem, and here is a solution. So they saw it as a good solution, not because it's what the ancients did, but this is, for a modern society, a modern solution. And so both started using lottery And a second thing is, if you take a smaller group, make your process longer, more informed, make it longer, because we should not forget the solution that deliberative democracy tries to advocate is not only the way you recruit people, but it's also the way you run your processes. And so this was academics, by the way, just as a small, which I love, they both had a daughter, also at a month interval with the same name, right? So there's a bit of almost parallel lives to these two men. It took until about 2003 until a government was willing to do this. In Canada, it'll be 20 years next year. In British Columbia, in Canada, the electoral system had to be reviewed. Now, this is a bit like, you know, politicians deciding on their own rules how politicians should be elected. And there was a bit of controversy, like, well, that's about like chickens running the hen house, you know. We should find another way, and how to do that without politicians would be like, yeah, but you don't want the activist groups to run it, etc. So, and then, again, some academics came up with the, why don't we do that system where we take a random sample of the population, and they work for months on end, I think about a year they spent looking at the electoral system of, but not only their own system, they heard from experts from around Europe also on proportional representation and on different types of representation. In the end, they proposed a drastic change to the electoral system in British Columbia. The politicians said, we have to put this to a referendum so everybody can decide, and they put the threshold at 60%, which for a referendum is pretty steep. Brexit wouldn't have made it, and so I think it just faltered by 58 or something like that. But some scholars from Europe were actually invited to be, amongst others, some people in Ireland noticed they had some trouble in 2007, 2008, and you'll hear from one of those Irish persons who is sitting in the back of the room. And they were the first in Europe as public officials to look at this. Art, you will admit when you do this presentation, first as a kind of like, we need to solve something now, but discovering that this actually works, and this actually helps solve policy problems. So slowly this idea from academic became something that political levels started to use and realized that this actually had a real surplus value. So slowly, this is where we're now in what some people have called the deliberative wave. A wave because we went from 1 2 a year to dozens. If you think there's a few 10,000 municipalities in the whole of Europe, that is still a very small wave. But considering where we come from, these things are now happening in almost every country at all different levels. You know, the French had the national level. Yves Dejaeghere will talk about some of this on climate, but also one on the end of life. Martin Assassi, one of the speakers, was involved in that one. It's been done in Bosnia with different groups who have a strong history of conflict behind them in Mostar. It's been done bottom-up with hundreds of people in Brussels by an organization where I was once the coordinator of the G1000 during a big constitutional political crisis. And slowly we're even seeing this seeping through where it's not even activists. In the city of Ghent, for example, it's the administration that pushed politicians to do their participatory budgeting with sortition. They called me at some point for some technical, but they were like, we want to do sortition because we always get the same people in the room, and we convince the politicians that this is just not working. So it's the administrative level actually saying to politicians, we need to change the way we do these things. So slowly it's even bottom up from the people working in projects who go like, we really need to renovate how we look at. So now, this has garnered a lot of attention and interests. Here you are, and because I ruthlessly steal from everybody, I think, Eva, this is your metaphor, that it's like a wedding. organizing a citizen assembly is a big process. That's what gives it part of the surplus value. Because if you reduce the openness of participation, you actually thread on one principle of participation. It is everybody can come into the room. You should not forget you're saying, no, we're just going to take 99 Irish citizens, or so many people from Melbourne, or so many people from France, and that's the group. Can I be part of the group? No, you weren't in the lottery. It means you have to perform very high on all the other principles. You need to make sure that this process really is well prepared. And so it is hard, but I think everybody in the room who's run one will say this is like super hard, but it's one of the most rewarding things you can do. Please, if I'm speaking in your name and saying something wrong, let me know. So, the clicker. So, you will need to think about your process before you start your process. This will be things like, what exact question will I ask these people? What is the problem we'll throw at this group of citizens? This is Ian Walker will tell you after me, will tell you about this issue. You will have to think about, okay, this will link up to policy and the administration. How do I do that? How do I link this up? Even before you invite citizens or write letters. So Art O'Leary will talk to you about this tomorrow afternoon. How do you link your political level up? You will need a governance structure. Who will run? Who will have the right to pick speakers, to decide who takes what decisions in this, if this is part of your democracy? So before you even find a room, you will need to think about a good governance system. There's a workshop that Damir Kapicic will lead, talking about just that. You will need to think about how you will communicate to your wider public. Again, even before you, how do you make sure this is public, this is open? So Lise Deshotel will talk a bit about all the communication they had in a national, very visible project around climate in France. Then there's more to that. I'm taking this short because I'm close to time. But one of your big issues will be, if this is about getting a select group together, recruitment will be something you really need to think about very well. So Damir will also have a plenary session on recruitment. Part of recruitment is the sortition, this lottery, this very technical thing, but which comes with a lot of aspects to it. A second part of it is inclusion, and I think somebody here mentioned already, like, how do we then reach these hard-to-reach publics? And so Irene Alonso, who is our project manager at FIDE, has written extensively about this and will have a workshop specifically then on inclusion. Sometimes even if you recruit some people and you bring them in the room, if they don't feel comfortable to talk, well, they will sit there and you will have your symbolic participation, but they will not really participate. So there's also part of that is recruitment and also inclusion, and thinking about how to get people involved and in what ways. You will present citizens with information. This is very sensible. What information will you present to them? You don't want to sway them with one side of information, because then people outside of the room will think, okay, this was biased. So Marjan will have a session on information provision. She worked on the end-of-life topic, Citizen Assembly in France, very sensible topic. How do you make sure that every aspect of such a delicate question is put forward? Then there is the deliberation. This is not a discussion, and so a big role will be about facilitation. And so Zakia Elvang, who works in Denmark and in Copenhagen, has done some really interesting projects, amongst other a very similar to that plan in Brussels, a very sensitive public work, well, one of the biggest public works, I think, planned in Denmark ever, but she will talk about facilitation in sometimes very polarized and difficult situations, but more in general. And so facilitation is about deliberation and getting people to then write recommendations and decide on something that they will hand over to the authorities. And then finally, you will need some form of follow-up. Again, Art O'Leary will talk about how, for example, in Ireland, this is connected to follow-up, for example, in commission, or how politics responds to recommendations that come out of this. And we also have a workshop on digital deliberation, because in some cases this might be geographical, this might be a pandemic, might make that you not always have the ability to meet with people face to face. And there's a lot to be said to meet face to face, but sometimes this is just not possible. And so Lise will also talk a bit about the experiences that they had actually due to the pandemic, where some of their sessions had to be done online, and how you can maybe work around this. Now, one of the things that in international organizations, also people like FIDE and other organizations have been pushing very much for is some form of good principles and standards. So one of the most known one in our field is the OECD, has come out with a number of good practice principles. I'm not going to go through all of them, but there is really an importance when you plan your project to look at this type of publications, especially if it's your first time, to really have a sort of check mark that you are really thinking of all the elements. Because in the end, all of this comes down to, and this I stole from Peter MacLeod, a Canadian organizer of Citizen Assemblies, he puts it down in 3 words: design for legitimacy. In the end, people outside of the room need to look at your process and think, there's a decision taken in City Hall based on the work of this group of citizens, and I think that's fair. This is about information, this is about how you recruit it, this is about transparency. So all these principles boil down to other people who will be affected by what happens through that group should think, that's legitimate, that's fair. This is the same, the litmus test for recruitment we often say is people look at the photo of the group and go like, I could have been part of that group. That looks like I could have been in there. If not, if people look at that group and go like, yeah, we're not there again, and if that is a sizable group of your population. So all of these things kind of boil down, but please consult this literature. Yes. What have we learned? And I'll quickly go, this is non-exhaustive, but first of all, if you do this well, citizens will do the job. Of course, the question then comes politicians and etc., but there are criteria and ways to do this. Don't do this in an afternoon, don't do this in 2 hours, but if you do this well, especially time is important, information, enough resources, citizens will do this. Citizens will show up weekend after weekend and work, read through information packages, travel long distances. There's everybody who's worked in this can tell you anecdotes of somebody who was sick but then came anyway, or found a babysit even though it was hard because they wanted to be part of that group. People see a sense of purpose and will do the job. And very often they will be more ambitious. For example, in climate assemblies, they will sometimes be more ambitious than politicians can be. It can help break political deadlocks. Yes, Ireland again being very often a cited example, but there are a lot of other smaller scale examples to be given that this group giving these recommendations, this group of citizens, very often can break through some of the polarization or standstill that politics is increasingly also experiencing. Citizens love it, yes? You will have the lone grumpy exception. You will, you know, before you come back to me in a few months like we did this and there was a guy who didn't love it, but most citizens, many citizens will tell afterwards this is one of the most beautiful things they've done. And I think this is about a sense of purpose. It is hard work, but citizens suddenly feel that they have a sense of purpose for their community. And in a world where more and more people are treated as consumers, this is something that gives them a surplus value that they didn't expect was there. There's beautiful stories, again, to be told over coffee, I think, by all the organizers of some people. I remember the G1000, we had people who say, like, after the birth of my children, this is the most beautiful day of my life. Stuff like that. This is the other side of the lonely, grumpy person, but still, you would be surprised how this is an experience for many people that really changes them. you will get those people in the room that are never there, if you do it right, yes? And so this will make your governance more inclusive. I remember an anecdote talking to a politician. They organized this, and she said, we had a person from a district, immigrant background, who actually, after the coffee break, took all the sandwiches and put them in a bag to bring. And she was like, I actually never meet people like that, because I'm all the time as an MP, a member of parliament. And so just meeting somebody like that, even in my constituency work, I hardly ever really encounter and talk with. Maybe shake hands, but like have a genuine interaction. So, but you need ambition. So again, Irene will have a special workshop on that, if that's what you're interested in. Citizens outside of the room who know about this. Yes, and this is going to be one of your challenges also if you do this. Yes, media think this is very boring, because there is no fight, there is no political horse race, there is no big names. But if people know about this and they kind of hear what it is, many people outside of the room go like, that seems like a pretty good system. Yes? So it does get a sort of legitimate support, but it's often hard. For places where this is really an issue, it can help increase transparency and accountability, because all information given to that group of people should be public to everyone. Yes? So it's not a back door. We close the door and only those in the room can hear. The information given here, if you're a stakeholder and you have to take a position, you're not talking to a politician behind a closed door. You will have to make your argument for everybody. Now, is this magic that solves all of your problems? You know, I feel like I'm on a market selling, you know, the sponge that will clean everything. Some of the things will happen immediately. Yes? If you do this well, and you're like, we want to have people in the room we've never had there, you do it well, you do your process, that person will be there. It's an immediate effect. If you talk about, democracy needs to be more resilient, and we've organized a Citizens Assembly, and we still have a few problems, I don't want to get your phone call, you promised this would solve democracy, and we organized one Citizen Assembly, it's not there. And this is where I start to use the metaphor of a fitness. If you go to the fitness once, you will feel better, you will have sweated, but if you've never done sports and you've been drinking a bit too much beers, and you won't go once to the fitness and go like, I don't have a six-pack. You will need to do this repetitively if it's really about making your democracies more resilient, having long-term effects. It will require long-term engagement. It will also require your out-of-the-room citizens to start seeing like, this is a different way we do democracy, and it won't happen with the one. So, and yeah, the other problem, of course, if you run perfect processes, but there's a politician at the end who goes like, thank you for the recommendations, and citizens feel this is just symbolic and a sham, their trust will be lower than before. There's actually research on that. If people feel this was a sham, they will trust you less than actually before. Now, and I'm wrapping up, if you want to do this more than once, there are places that have started to institutionalize this. It's not part of this program because there's enough to talk about to do it once and to do it well, but there are a few places. The first one was a small parliament in my country, Belgium, the German-speaking community, that actually installed a fixed citizen assembly drawn by lot next to their parliament. It's been working for several years now. Elections are coming up, and all parties want to continue to do this. So there's a clear sense that this works. For once, The Economist wrote positively about something in politics in my country, a Belgium experiment that Aristotle would have approved on. And so there are now places that actually are doing this for several years, every year in a row. Yes. Now, and this is my wrapping this up, what we'll be doing here today, we will not make you the definitive. If you came here and go like like these YouTube things, become in 10 minutes, that's not a promise. We will tell you as much as possible, but you will not be the definitive expert. Yes, this is not a wonder solution. But we will tell you about all the ingredients that go into it. We will give you a sample of all these different, but also issues, problems, things to think about. It will be a lot. And so this means when you start cooking yourself, and I don't know how long this metaphor will last, but you will remember, I need to look up this, I need to, and so we will also provide you with a lot of resources that all the speakers refer to. If you look at the QR code, there is a resources. We will plunk a lot of the papers we referred to back there. So you will hear from different people, yes? You will hear stories from local level, national level. That's what Philip referred to. But you will also talk to each other. And I hope that's also, part of this is also meeting each other and creating some networking and exchanging your own context. And how do we do this? I'm the last one who speaks without you doing something. From now on, we will have plenary formats, and this was in the package, so maybe you already know this, but if you skim through it very fast, our plenaries have a certain structure. Somebody will talk for 30 minutes, explaining a bit the story of their case, and they will go into one specific aspect. So for example, Ian will come after me after the coffee break. We'll talk about mandate and question, but he will also tell a story a bit about an assembly they ran. Then you will have some time to reflect on what did he just tell, do we want some clarification, little Q&A. And then we will have 30 minutes of table work where we will ask you to think about your own context. How does what Ian just told apply to your context? What would be your problem? How would you formulate? What question would you ask to citizens, etc. So, and then we come back to a plenary conversation. So every time we will let you think through every of these aspects for your own situation. So if you haven't done so, think about a policy problem you would, if you don't come here with a concrete policy problem, do try to think of something in your own community that this would apply to. And then we have 4 workshops that will run twice, so you can pick 2. And so you had to choose, so I will not repeat them. I've also mentioned them during this presentation. And they are twice at the end of the day. And they have a more open format. We let the speakers there a bit do their own thing and see what fitted best. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the next 2 days with us. Thank you.